بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we have reached our next chapter we wish to discuss, which is the Bab al-Sabq or Sabq is the competition. So essentially competition and wagering. So here what you find is that we are, as you see now, some of these discussions and these chapters have, they're still discussing transactions to some extent. However, you can see it's more to do with the wider sense of the mu'amalat, the wider sense of the dealings. Hence, like last week where we discussed matters of lost property, things such as that. That lost property in asl is not connected to al-Biu'. It's not connected to this particular topic of buying and selling. However, it may enter into it afterwards if the person now takes possession of the lost property, or if those conditions are fulfilled. However, in its asl, its origin and the foundation of the matter is that it is not transfer or dealing. And so, with the topic today as well, it's also the case. And so, this is referring to wagering or competition, competing with one another. And the author raḥimahullah begins by mentioning تجوز المسابقة بغير جعل في الأشياء كلها. And so it's permissible to have competition and to compete with one another in everything where there is no prize, where there's no prize given, where there's no reward for that particular action. So we're talking about just general competing. So it's not, as we mentioned before, where a person's tasked with doing something and then he receives something in return. And we mentioned the hadith regarding some of the companions that did what? Barakallahu feekum. Where they received something in return. Last week we mentioned it. The ruqyah. So they performed the ruqyah and they received something in return. Now we're talking about one individual competing with another. So the asl is that you cannot receive anything in return for that. You could do it for leisure, and it can be done for as a pastime, as they say, but it cannot be an action where a person receives something in return of that, some sort of prize. And so essentially, any form of racing, for example, can be done. And this is racing, whether it be racing upon, racing with your feet, so racing yourselves, or racing on boats and the likes of that. All of this can be done, as long as there is no specific reward attached to that. Is that clear, barakallahu feekum? وَلَا تَجُوزُ بِجُعْلٍ. And if there is something attached to it by way of this particular ju'l, by way of that particular reward, then it's not permissible. إلا في الخيل والإبل والرمي. Except when it comes to the horses, racing horses, so competing with horses, camels, and rami. Rami is referring to the archery. And this is based on the hadith of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, narrated by Ibn Umar. The hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, and the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam سابق بين الخيل من الحفياء And so the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, he performed this action of the racing between the horses. So it's something that was found. Naam. And generally as well, going back to what we mentioned in relation to racing oneself, al-Qudāmah, then it's also mentioned that the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, in a hadith which is found in Sunan Abi Dawud and Sunan Ibn Majah, he alayhi salatu wasalam raced Aisha ala Qudāmah. That he raced Aisha ala Qudāmah. As for what we want to mention in relation to the exception of racing the horses, the camels, or the archery, where a person can receive something in reward, then that is based on the hadith of Abū Hurayrah, which is found in Sunan Abi Dawud. Now, the hadith of Abū Hurayrah, which is found in Sunan Abi Dawud, which is Sahih, where the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam states, لا سبق إلا في نسل أو خف أو حافر, that there is no wagering except for the point of the arrow, referring to the archery, or the hooves, referring to the hooves of the horse and the camel. As mentioned, this is a narration found in the Sunan of Abi Dawud. Naam. And this is, as we mentioned, the sound in the Sunan of Abi Dawud. And so this is the distinction between the two. This is the distinction between the two. And so, if now, for example, the جعل من غير متسابقين جاز وهو للسابق منهما, and if this reward comes from other than the two competitors, then this is permissible. So again, as you understand, the asl is that it's not permissible, except in which cases, barakallahu feekum? Archery, horse racing, and camel racing. These are the exceptions. If now, with that money, or that, let's say money, but the reward, let's say, it comes from other than those two that are competing, then it's permissible. Naam. If it comes from outside of those two, naam, because there's no irtibat, there's no form of connection in that dealing, in that regard. Naam, there's no form of connection. And so, if now, for example, you find that one individual wants to wager something that he owns within it, then as Ibn Qudāmah mentions, that a third party has to be brought in. A third party has to be brought in. So, for example, if you have, the two individuals, and one of them wants to place something that he owns as part of that wager, then it cannot just be one against the other. There has to be a third party entered. So, to use the example, if you have one individual who wants to race with his horse, and the second individual wants to race with his horse, and then one individual wants to place as part of the rewards something he owns. Now, there cannot be a direct competition between these two individuals. There has to be a third added in. Now, so there's to be a third party added in. Is that clear, barakallahu feekum? And so, with that, if whoever attains and whoever wins from that, then they take from whatever the reward is. But there has to be that third party entered into it. And so, with that as well, barakallahu feek, if enters, so the third party enters, and you have the hadith of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, man adkhala farasan bayna farasain wa huwa la ya'man min an yasbiqa falaysa biqimar. And so whoever enters their horse between two horses, so he enters into that same race or competition, وهو لا يأمن بأن يسبق فليس بالقمار, and he is not overly confident that his horse will triumph and win, then this is not regarded as being qimar. This is not regarded as being gambling. ومن أدخل فرسا بين فرسين وقد أمن أن يسبق فهو قمار. And whoever enters the horse and he has that belief and that confidence that the horse will triumph, then this enters into gambling. Now then it becomes gambling. Of course, the gambling is haram. Now, the gambling is haram. So with this, barakallahu feekum, we understand from this particular statement here is that the distinction between merely competing and the qimar and barakallahu feekum, this matter of gambling is based upon the person's intent and their belief in regards to it. Now, their belief in regards to it. So if they believe that the horse will triumph, now if they believe the horse will triumph, then in that regard, this is regarded as being qimar. This is regarded as being gambling. As to this particular narration, then the narration mentions whoever, this is narration of Abū Hurayrah, so whoever enters his horse in between the two and he does not believe that the horse will triumph, he doesn't have the firm belief that the horse will triumph, then this is not regarded as being qimar. And Shaykh al-Albani mentions the additional speech, the opposite of that. The additional speech is actually from the speech of Sa'id ibn Musayyib. So this particular narration is actually the narration of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib. And it's not actually regarded in relation to be a hadith of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. Because Sa'id ibn Musayyib is from whom? Tabi'i, from the Kibar Tabi'in. So if now Sa'id ibn Musayyib says that the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says this, then what is our issue? There's a break in the chain. Why? Because Sa'id ibn Musayyib, as we mentioned, is a tabi'i. He's a tabi'i. So now, if a tabi'i, you cannot say that he's directly narrated from the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Naam. Cannot now be said that he directly narrated from the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. However, we cannot now say that the chain, the one that is missing in the chain is just a Sahabi. Is that clear? Because if we just said it's a Sahabi missing, then what? If we just said it's just a Sahabi missing. Everyone understand the question? No problem. If we said this is the narration of Sa'id ibn Musayyib. Sa'id ibn Musayyib narrates and he says that this is the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said this about the qimar, about the gambling. Can we now say that in that chain is just a Sahabi missing. Because Sa'id al-Musayyib is a Tabi'i. And if he's a Tabi'i narrating from the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, we know there's a break. Naam. Is it sufficient just to say that that break includes a Sahabi? No. Why? It could be another Tabi'i. It could be more than just one individual missing. Doesn't just mean that just because a Tabi'i narrates from the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, that there's only one person within that chain. It could be someone else missing. Naam. And so due to that, this particular narration, or narrations like these, are referred to as mursal. Yeah, the narration which is mursal. Narration which is mursal is a narration that a Tabi'i narrates from the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. Now, a hadith mursal, if we just said it's a Sahabi missing, then the reality is that there's no problem with it then. Why? If we just say it's just a Sahabi missing. Because they're all thiqat. Naam, they're all thiqat, they're all trustworthy. If you're saying now that in the narration there's a Tabi'i, then there's a Sahabi that we don't know, but then then after it's a Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, then it's a connected chain. Understand? Because the Sahaba, as long as you know that person is Sahabi, then they are all trustworthy. But we don't know who is in between those two individuals. Naam. Ala kullin, as due to the fact that we understand it to be the narration of Sa'id ibn Musayyib, yani Tabi'i min kibar al-Tabi'in, then essentially we'd understand this to be from his fatawa. Yani from his fatawa. And from his understanding of this particular matter of gambling and how it occurs. So a person should not enter the horse between the two whilst believing that this horse will win. And essentially that's what gambling is. Now, nobody puts their money down on something unless they think it's going to triumph, it's going to win. People don't put their money towards something in gambling unless they think that it's going to be something which is going to be successful. Naam. And so this is the same thing. So it's essentially it's based upon what does the person believe in when they are putting their money down. Now I'm going to put in that commodity down. If they believe when they put that commodity down that this thing is going to win, then this is the gambling. This is the gambling. Is this clear, barakallahu fikum? Naam. If now they don't know, they generally don't know. Let's see what happens. For example, then this is not regarded as being the gambling. It's not regarded as being in this matter of gambling. So, and so with that as well, when it comes to the musabaqa, the racing, then it's a must that you have the tahdeed. So you have to stipulate the distance. Now you have to stipulate the distance. Now stipulate the distance where this race is going to occur. Is it going to be X amount of meters or yards or whatever it is? Now, and likewise as well, because this is talking about, of course, racing. But now we said, what's the other exception? Archery. Now, the archery. Now, with the archery, you have to stipulate what the target is. Now, what the target is, and you do not stipulate the bird. So you do not stipulate in this case the distance. So you are stipulating what the actual target is, and not the distance. Is that clear, barakallahu fikum? Because when we're discussing the matter of of archery, it doesn't necessarily mean that you stipulate the target, or you have like the targets we see them today, those round targets. Now, archery could mean anything. You could be like, for example, you have to hit that tree. Now, that's the target. Or you have to hit whatever the case may be. So you stipulate, but you have to stipulate it. And that is the manner in which this particular thing of the competition and wagering occurs. So, just to make it clear, wagering in its asl is what? Or competing, racing and competing with one another, its asl is what? It's halal, it's allowed. It's allowed. As long as there's no prize. Now, as long as there's no prize. If there is a prize, then what? In its asl, it's what? It's haram. Now, if there is a prize in its asl, it's haram. Except for 3 things. Racing the horse, racing the camel, and racing or the archery, sorry, now. So if you are competing one another and the prize comes from where? From outside, then the ruling on that is what? The prize comes from a third party. It's halal. The prize comes from the third party, then it is halal. If that prize comes from one of the 2 competitors, then what is required? What is required? If the prize comes from one of the 2 competitors, you need a third competitor. You need a third competitor to be added. Now, as for that third competitor, then what? What is required from them? Now, so he doesn't have the actual belief that he's going to win. Why? Because if he has the belief he's going to win, then he's entering in order to take whatever that prize is from that other party. Even though he's not guaranteed he's going to take it, but he's entering in with that belief. And then this would enter into what particular ruling? Gambling. Now, enter into the ruling of gambling. And likewise as well, we mentioned that what needs to be stipulated? The target needs to be stipulated. The target needs to be stipulated. The target needs to be stipulated. That's in the terms of the archery. And what else though? The distance. This needs to be stipulated for what? For the racing. So these are the 2 distinctions. So for the racing, you stipulate what? The distance, of course. And then for the archery, you stipulate the target. Now, and this is how this particular matter occurs, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, after that, we have the next chapter, and our final chapter of Kitābul Bayʼ. And it's a chapter regarding al-Wadīʿah. Al-Wadīʿah is referring to al-Amana. So it's regarding essentially what is left as a deposit. An amana, لا ضمان فيها على موضعه ما لم يتعدى. فإن لم يحفظها في حرز مثلها أو مثل الحرز الذي أمر بإحرازها فيه. And so this is in regards to this amana, something that is left with an individual. It's left with the individual. And there's particular things that can be done with that, يعني, deposit, if you like. So the first mentioned is التصرف، يعني يتصرف فيها لنفسه. نعم. If the person has used it for his own يعني benefit, for his own self. For example, it's the riding beast، يعني ركب الدابة لغير نفعها، لغير نفعها. So he rides on the riding beast for other than its benefit. For example, so he rides on the riding beast for other than its benefit. What do we understand from that? Is that, or what is an example of riding a beast for its benefit? Going back to what we discussed regarding what? You want to remember? What does this relate to? Now, the rates when we were talking about the collateral, and that you may use it for its benefit. So, for example, now you riding the beast for that you're riding the beast for its benefit now. But in this case, we're talking about riding the beast for other than its benefit. Does that make sense? Why would you ride it for its benefit, my friend? Or like, in what case would you have the riding beast and you ride it for the benefit of the beast, the animal itself? The health of the animal, like what, for example? Like, well, how do you mean, sir? Just to elaborate. The animal. Let's leave the animal, for example. No, essentially that the animal, you can't just leave it idle within one place. So you need to give it exercise. So you may ride it. No, but this is now a deposit which has been given as part of a transaction, for example. So you ride that riding beast for the benefit of maintaining the quality of the animal. But now we're talking about the person riding it without the benefit, without it being for the benefit of the animal. He's riding it because he needs to get from A to B, for example. Or يعني he wears someone's clothing. So the clothing is part of the daman, or as part of that deposit, and it becomes destroyed. Then within that particular dealing, batala يعني استئمانه. So it becomes now batil, this particular amana, because the person now has he has essentially overstepped the boundaries set in that particular dealing. So he surpassed those boundaries. And so then due to that is regarded as something where it's a ta'addi. And so he now has nullified that dealing. He's nullified that trust. So we mentioned that the person, if he uses a riding beast, going back to the example of the riding beast, if he uses it for other than the benefit, then it has entered into that matter. So it's the same as a person wearing the thobe and destroying the thobe. He wears a thobe and he destroys the thobe. Or the person rides the animal and he rides it without due reason. Then this is the same thing. He has nullified it. Likewise, what a person may do with this deposit and what has been deposited to him, خلطها بما لا تتميز منه. He mixes it with something the way he's not able to distinguish it from others. So he mixes it with something where he's not able to distinguish that thing from others. So for example, the individual, he's given a bag of rice, for example, as the deposit for a transaction. And then he places that rice in the container with his rice. Now, you're not able to say, okay, this was the rice he gave me, and then this is the rice that I had before. Of course not. It's all the same. Now, so he's mixed it in with with it. In this scenario, then he has now placed himself in a scenario where he's not able to return it. Now, he's not able to return it if in any scenario that he needs to return it. Is that clear? So as soon as he mixes it with something where he's not able to distinguish this from that, then he's not able to distinguish it. So you can't return it anymore after that. Likewise, أخرجها لينفقها ثم ردها. Then likewise, if the person was to take it and spend it, then he is also responsible for it. So he has to return it as he in terms of how he received it. So if he's given something and he takes it and he uses it, he spends from it, then he has to return it as it was in the same condition. Was that clear, Barakallahu? This is the other manner in what we have to do with it. If, for example, the person كسر ختم كيسها ضمن لذلك, and if the person was to break its container or what is held in, then he is held responsible for that as well. He has to establish the guarantee in that particular matter as well. And so he has to return it, and even if, for example, now is mentioned امتنع من ردها in the طلبها مع إمكانه, so he refuses to return it when it is asked of him to return it. When it's sought from him to return, then this is something that is within, or this is something that he's guaranteed, and they has to return it now. If he refuses, then he becomes, by way of that, what is referred to as al-Ghāṣib. Al-Ghāṣib. Well, al-Ghāṣib essentially is the one that is the thief, or the individual that has taken something by force. So there's a distinction between the ghasb wa sariqa. Sariqa, or the sariq, or the lusus, the thief, essentially the one that takes something from without the person's knowledge. You take something from an individual without their knowledge. So, for example, what we have now, for example, where they refer to the pickpocket, taken without his knowledge, for example, or the one that enters into the home of the individual and takes things without their knowledge. And there's a distinction between the two. Why? Because the ahkam are different. The ahkam in deen are different in terms of what is done with this individual and what is done with that. As for this case, this person is not the sadiq, is the ghāṣib. Why? Because the person knows fully well who has this commodity of his, and he's refusing to return it. So he enters into this particular ruling of the one that has taken something by way of force. Naam. And so with that, barakallahu feekum, we understand يعني how this particular matter occurs. And likewise as well, the matter of borrowing. The one that borrows, then this is something that is upon him to maintain. It's upon him to maintain the commodity that he borrows. It's upon him to maintain that particular commodity that he borrows. And of course, from his adab is that he returns it just as he received it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. With that, we conclude what we wanted to discuss from this section here, and yani in general, the Kitab al-Bay' from ʿUmdatul Fiqh, alhamdulillah. And what we'll go on to next lesson, next week, will be the Kitab al-Ijara, so the chapter referring to al-Ijara, and it's a short chapter. And then bi'idnillahi ta'ala, after that we probably will begin Kitab al-Nikah. So go straight on to Kitab al-Nikah, Kitab al-Ijara, and then yani Kitab al-Nikah. And Allah ta'ala knows best. That's my initial thoughts in relation to what we wish to do going forward, inshallah, with the text. Barakallahu feekum, wa jazakum Allahu khayra, wa sallallahu wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. No.
Could you repeat what you said about if he mixes the things that has been left with Mr. Trust with his? Could you mention what you said?
So if he mixes it, so he's not able to distinguish anymore, then he no longer has the opportunity to return it afterwards, because he's not able to distinguish what is his from what is, or what was already his and from what he's added to it. So he can no longer return it. That's a good example of the rice, for example. He's not able to distinguish what was the rice that was given to him and what was the rice he already owned. So he's no longer able to say, I'm going to return this amount to you. No.
So how would you return the first amount?
So if it's a case of, because we're talking about the deposit now, so a person is going to give it to you, and there's a particular other dealing anyway after that. So he says, for example, I'll give this to you, and then we'll conclude the dealing after that, the transaction, for example. Thereafter, he has to conclude the transaction, essentially, because he can't return it. Does that make sense? So he's now bound by that transaction even more so than before. No. No. He has to get permission from it. If he doesn't, then it's upon him is to return it as he'd taken it. That makes sense. So if he doesn't get the permission, he has to return it as he found it. No.
Deposit, not as an amount,
Deposit in a transaction now. It can be both. So it's referring to like something that is deposited as part of a transaction, but also in a manner if we're talking about something that is lent, because the last ibadah was referring to something that's lent as well. So something is lent to the individual with the intent that's going to be returned to them. Now, with the deposit, we're talking about something that is not necessarily going to ever be returned to them. So these are two things, but the ahkam are the same in how the person is meant to deal with it. No.
How far do you think you can be in the same condition go? I'm buying your car, you travel 2 miles, you use a bit of fuel.
If now, for example, you have lent someone something with the intent of it being used, then there has to be some sort of agreement in terms of its usage. if now, for example, give you the example you gave of the car, the person borrows the car, but he says, I want you to give it back to me with the same mileage on it. It's impossible. I borrowed you the car. Understand? But of course, a person can say, I'm going to borrow you the car. I don't want any scratches on it. I don't want it to come back with dents in it. That's reasonable. But if so, it's about what is part of what is the agreement, like what is the usage of it. It's like saying, I'm going to borrow you this book, but make sure you don't open it. It's not it takes away from the benefit of it. So if we're talking about now the borrowing of something, and you're going to borrow it for some use and benefit, then it has to be, the agreement has to be within that realm there of the benefit. And anything outside of that, then that would enter into returning it back to in its same condition. So I don't want it returned in a damaged condition and the likes of that. But you can't now say, you can't stipulate, I don't want it to have any signs of use. For example, there's going to be a sign of use. Yeah, that's if a person says that, unless he says Asda in Birmingham, then like if he's saying, I'm going to borrow your car for this reason, now, then there has to be an agreed amount. That's why, for example, you might agree in the miles that you say, okay, I'm going to use it, but I'm only going to use it for X amount of miles. Anything above or over that, then you have to pay more, or whatever the case is. Now, so there has to be a stipulated agreement in that case as well. No, no.
If you lend someone something, you have to stipulate and you're going to take it back, or can you just anytime go and say,
or anytime you say, give it back. It's not necessarily. It's always best to stipulate the time, but it's not something which is conditional. It's not something which is conditional. But at the same time, of course, is that which is ahsan is better, is that you stipulate a time so that, for example, you don't ask for it in the middle of a time when the person's in the middle of using it, for example, or you the person to the lender doesn't find himself in a situation where he's asking the person when he's in the middle of using it. So it's the one that is lending, he's in a hardship. He may find himself in a hardship. Whilst the lender doesn't want to put himself in a hardship where the person just uses it and it's almost as if he owns it now. He's had it for so long and he doesn't know when to ask for it back. No, so it should always be better to stipulate that time to avoid any form of difficulty or khilaf and hardship between the two individuals. No. If they don't return it as it was, then it's upon them now to either give it its value, or they have to return something of its like. No, but they can't just say, oh, Malish, I broke it, for example. They have to return it in some way, shape, or form. No.
Even accidentally, you had an amount and someone came into your house, took it. That's out of your control. You have to kind of replace it.
No, I still have to replace it because you took it because it's you're responsible for it at that point in time. So it's not about the person doing it, ta'ammudan or other than that. Because if a person does it deliberately, of course that's worse. But if a person now, for example, I lend you this book, and then you say, look, someone came to my house and stole the book. I still like my book back. In a sense. So it's like, okay, I want my book back. So who's gonna pay for it? We can't ask for the thief, we don't know who it is. And you're the last one to see it. Understand? So in that scenario, it would be a case of they have to recompense. No. Allah knows best.
The previous bab, if the third person comes in and he knows that because the third person is needed in the time when they want to put something forward, how will that third person know? He doesn't have the intention, but he knows that he's going to win. maybe he has a stronger horse or he has a faster car, for example. If he knows, is he better for him to just reject it and be like, I don't want to do it?
Yeah, so if the person they have to be equal, that's one thing as well. Jazakallah khair, just another point to mention that if you're entering in the third party, the third horse in this case, it has to be equal quality, so equal strength and quality. You can't now enter a horse and it's just like gonna clearly win. I mean, the other two horses are closer to donkeys than horses, and then you've got like a big horse, and so there has to be, it has to be equal. That's the first thing. Then we enter into discussion about what does the actual person believe is going to happen with it. If he believes that, even for example, he might be khabir, he might be like an individual that is well experienced when it comes to horses, and so then he sees, no, this horse is going to win, and so he enters into it in that case, and he shouldn't do that. Leave it. No. But the matter also rests upon the fact that the horse should be of the same quality, or from what they're aware, the same quality. No. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم. وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
What does it mean if one of them